a couple here at Oxford Bookstore. So Krishnadi has kind of known me from my student days and later in my Salat days as a poet. And then as Krishnadi, I remember, said at the last launch, it was the book called Poppies in the Post. She said that I had probably arrived as a poet. So coming from her, it was a huge endorsement, of course, as you can imagine. You can see Devdatta, who is Pradipta, we are all students, we have all been at CU and all that. So Mrinal sitting over there knows the legendary stories about Krishnadi and Shamguptadi and that time at CU, let's put it that time. Yes. So anyway, it's my, as I said, a wonderful honor to invite Krishnadi to say a few words about Debashish Lahiri, the poet, as she sees it, sees the development of a poet's career perhaps. Who better to say a few words at the very inception of today's event. Krishnadi, distinguished writer, critic, academic, and as I said, a legend in Kolkata. Krishnadi, would you please come up and say a few words? Thank you so much.
That I would like you to launch my book, and I'm sending you a copy. It was impossible to say no, and I couldn't invent any excuse. And so I'm a very slow thinker. So I also immediately remember the fact that Debashish's first book that I was part of that book launch, and for that Debashish had come over to my home and we had a very long chat. He was a very young poet at that time. I wanted to say small boy, but I changed. So today, of course, I knew that Professor, probably I felt it in my bones that Professor Krishna Sen might be here. And so I thought, let me scribble down what my impressions about the book, rather than make colossal errors. Yes? So, and what, this is my instantaneous responses to this book. I haven't read every poem, nor did I have the opportunity of rereading the poems, because this particular book, from my own reading of contemporary poetry, is a book which really demands attention. It is not poetry that you can just read through and say, well, I know the content and I know what the poet is trying to do, and therefore, well, this is a very intriguing set of poems, and you leave it at that. There is much more to this particular book. And apart from the artistry, the visual pleasure of even turning the pages of the book, there is so much of attention to the crafting of every page of this book, which really I think we should congratulate Red River for this sort of meticulous attention. Meticulous attention to detail. And also, if you have a copy of the book with you, or later if you collect a copy of the book, you will notice that though the book bases itself on the reading of miniature paintings of India, that is North India, but what is very remarkable, as you open the pages, it seems that the words have been,
as Shakespeare would say, and as you have found out from Debashish's preambles, that I have, as it were, inspired him. So everything he does well is Debashish, and everything he does wrong is me. Take it that way. And yes, I have known Debashish from the student days. Is it 25 years at least, Debashish? It's been a long time.
End of the 90s.
End of the 90s. So shall we say from the last century?
Sounds like a historical novel.
It does, doesn't it? And it's been a very, very pleasant acquaintance with Debashish. I just want to say only two things to keep these few words really few. First, Shakespeare that a person will stand the test of time if he has been honored for 100 years. That hasn't happened to Devashish yet, and I hope will not for some time. But a person who stays with poetry through thick and thin for 10 years is in his soul a poet. So he's not someone who's dabbling. As you know, it is a favorite pastime of English honors and MA English and journalism people to write a bit of English poetry. But Devashish is obviously not that kind of poet because he has stayed with his poetry for 10 years. His first book, First Will and Testament, was 2012. And Tether That Light, and only poets can think of tethering that light. You do it through your words, you do it through your images. That is 2022. And just two short comments. When Devashish began, I said, you know, Devashish, you are a competent poet. Your rhythms, your images are interesting, but you know, there's too much of Eliotese, Vivakis, if you remember Devashish. You have to find your own voice. And when it came to Poppies in the First, which was his fourth book, I told him, Devashish, you found your voice. There are lines that I'm not saying, oh my God, those are smart lines. I'm saying, this is a line that lingers in my mind. So you did arrive as a poet, Devashish, but by the time of Poppies in the First. And the second thing I want to say is that he writes the most wonderful ekphrastic poetry. His poetry is interwoven with his knowledge of art especially, music also, but especially art. I think ekphrasis is a hallmark of the nature of Devashish's poetry. And my last comment on him, as a student, he was the person who understood theory the best. And people who understand theory the best usually turn to scholars. And this student of mine who understood theory the best in his batch has become a very committed poet. So, Devashish, you have arrived in another way. Analysis and aesthetics is a very difficult combination. Congratulations, Devashish.
The first thing that strikes me about this composition is that the less said, the better. I think we should not talk too much, you know. This is a book full of items, not call them items, worth celebrating upon rather than celebrating. The only simile that comes to my mind is perhaps the earliest of the modernist movements in art and literature, Impressionism. Think of Impressionism. It began because of a painting by Monet called Impression of Sunrise. And the entire movement had several layers. One of them was that the light changes through the day as it comes inside the room. That is one. Second is that through a perfect mix of brush strokes which were unfinished, you know, pigments would be the right term to use in those days, an impression was created. And of course, the effect was to move away from stark photographic realism to getting into the soul of the subject. If I think that is the best simile that I can think of in Tether That Light. Because you attach in different ways. It's not just that an animal is tied to a tree and that's tethering. No. Here it is a connection. It's a very subtle connection which is not even easily perceptible. It's almost like a melange at the edges. And abstract, certainly, but suffused with realism all the same. Of all the movements in modernism, the one that remains primarily realistic is the Impressionist movement, unlike Surrealism or Expressionism. So here it is realistic, but it is evocative of a time which was.
What a proud moment for all of us. I have the immense pleasure to once again welcome all of you to the grand launch of Debashish Lahiri's new collection of poems, Tether That Light. Congratulations once again, Debashish. As you all know, Tether That Light has been inspired by miniature paintings. So there is this, translation of image to word. And by miniature paintings, I mean Mughal paintings, Rajput paintings, Pahari paintings, Deccan paintings, Ragamala paintings. These are all woven as intertexts in Tether That Light. It's a brilliant collection. I have read the entire book of Tether That Light. It's a brilliant collection of poems, and I'm sure our eminent panelists, distinguished teachers, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, Professor Ashok Vishwanathan, Vinay Sharma ji, they are all here to shed far more light on Tether That Light. But before we start the formal, kind of panel discussion of Tether That Light, I would just like to say a few words on the book as such. This book, which has been very wonderfully, the cover design looks very impressive. It has been published by Red River Press, New Delhi, and this collection, it documents how cultural memory in the shape of Indian miniature paintings flows from an immemorial legendary past to a contemporary politically striated present. The artifacts and the poems surrounding them offer proof of a living tradition that permeates every sphere of life, from the mundane to the spiritual. With these very few words on Tether That Light, I would like to once again introduce my friend, colleague, Debashish Lahiri, Professor Krishna Sen, our teacher here, who has taught us, me and Debashish, during our postgraduate years at the University of Calcutta. She gave a very good introduction of the poet Debashish Lahiri in the today's session. But I would just like to give a little more a formal introduction to Debashish. He is an internationally acclaimed poet. His 4 books of poetry, the first one being First Will and Testament, which was very rightly pointed out, published in 2012. Krishnadi said it was published in 2012 by Writers Workshop, Kolkata. No Waiting Like Departure, 2016, which was shortlisted as one of the 5 best collections that year by Scroll and India Today. Tinder Tender, Poems of Love and Loitering, and Poppies in the Post and Other Poems. Visage Sans Verbs, Landscape Without Verbs, a French translation of his selected poetry, was published in May 2021 from Editions Epic, Algiers, Paris. Legion of Lost Letters, a collection of narrative poems on common lives in Roman Britain, is due to be published in 2023 from Black Spring Press, UK. And Debashish is the recipient of Prix du Mérite Naji Naman Literary Prize for Poetry in 2019 and an honorary member of Maison Naman pour la Culture. So that's a very brief introduction on Debashish, and I would like to also mention that in the cover page of this book you have 2 very eminent, famous practicing Indian English poets, Ranjit Haskote and Shudip Sen. writing for the blurb of the book. We also have Sanjukta Di, a very eminent poet, Indian English poet. She's very much here, so she will be talking more about it. But here in the blurb of this book, we have Ranjit Haskote, who has written these brilliant words, sumptuous with the sharp fragrance of herbs, the luminosity of colors, the cadence of song, tethered that light is sparkling and felicitous in its oscillation between the domain of the pictorial image and the domain of the word. That's Ranjit Haskote. And then we of course have Shudip Shen writing again in the back cover of this book. And Shudip Shen, as we all know, is the author of Erotext and editor of Converse, Contemporary English Poetry by Indians, published by Piparan Books, which has been recently published. And Shudip Shen has written these penned these wonderful words on Devashish's poems, largely inspired by the reproductions in B.N. Goswami's book, The Spirit of Indian Painting, 2014. Devashish creates a haunting visual gallery full of longing, light,